Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I thought I will present my projects, some projects more in a chronological order, from the first small things to the things we're doing at the office at the moment. And in between, I will just have a short Swedish architectural history, 6 slides, 20th century architectural history about my roots and the reason for that everything looks like shit in Sweden at the moment. Well, this is from the film or from the book by Kafka, The Process. Mr. K is opening the door. And this is the way we work at the office. It's always a struggle. It's a struggle towards a client, to the local community, or the contractor. That's sort of like the main power we get through our work is this sort of like agony that we experience working in this kind of in Sweden with architecture. And as I said, we have a small office, or I have a small office. We're only 4 or 5 people. It's located in Gothenburg on the west coast, opposite to Stockholm on the east coast, by the Atlantic Sea. It's the second largest city in Sweden, and in Sweden it's very much so that everything is orientated around Stockholm, the head capital. I am trained architect, but my first projects were actually furniture projects. I also studied graphic design, so actually the first projects were more like trying to be able to handle 2 dimensions, placing a letter on a sheet of paper and working with proportions. We don't have that in our architecture school. I don't think you have either, that you start with graphic design and geometry before moving into 3D. But for me, this was a very, I had to do this to be able to learn to handle that. And from there on, I moved into furnitures because I thought that the scale of architecture was a little bit big for me to understand. And I was interested in objects. And so it was obvious to start with something small that I can do myself at the workshop. And this is a small cafe chair for the Swedish company Nola. And in Sweden, we have a quite poor industry. I mean, we cannot do like they do in Italy, mold a one-piece plastic chair. I mean, we can. Our molds are not bigger than this, and we can maybe do a helmet, a Jofa helmet, when you play hockey. So I think this is something that I've been dealing with during the whole process for all projects, that to sort of like do the best of what you have. And for instance, here in Sweden we have a quite developed industry for CNC bending metal rods. For instance, we do springs for the Volvo trucks and so on. So this is a very affordable way of making a chair, for instance. So this was I had the production, and from there on, I just did a simple chair. And as we know, there is so many chairs out on the market and on the planet, so there's not really a reason for a new chair. But so I've always been trying to add something to the projects, even if it's small or if it's bigger architecture. And that's a sort of like an architectural value. I mean, it can be a reminisce or a history or something that get people to react and think. For instance, this is just a subtle gesture of the armrest. It's a little poetical bend that you can reminisce a French cafe chair, or just a subtle gesture that adds something that is not only physical function. This is a shelf system, CNC folded for the Danish furniture company Hay. And this is also a way that we work today with our architecture projects. We are working a lot with archetypes. The archetype of a shelf, and also the change in scale. This is actually my dad's old Meccano that is just upscaled. And by doing so, you get really a change of proportion, and it makes you react. This is also a very cheap way of dealing with metal, and everybody can do it. So this was a very a result of the production that we had in this case. This is a ashtray. This was during the 90s when you were not allowed to smoke in the restaurant, so they need to have public ashtrays outside the bars. And this is also like an archetype of a column, a Greek column. You have the cone where you put your ashes, and it falls down in the tube and ends in a water can in the box. So it is in a way a very functional piece, but the function shapes sort of like the form here. And it's also a homage maybe to the more Sotsas and the Memphis postmodernistic approach, which has been a part of all the projects we do, even if they're really strict now. There is always this a little bit naive touch to them. This is a knockdown table I did for an exhibition in Stockholm. It's called Beam. It's a sort of like a mix of an archetype of a load-bearing construction. You have this icon of the I-beam, and you have this also differences in material, emphasizing the different functions. You have the wood leg and the glass top to see the construction, and this metal beam. And it was done for a knockdown table, so it could be delivered in a flat package. And this is something I've always had in mind in all projects, this romantic idea about the workshop, the metal shop or the wood shop. My dad and now my brother has a small industry doing folding walls. And I used to spend all my time there when I was a kid, and looking at all these raw material and getting the smell of it. The furniture industry is a quite rapid industry. I mean, every year you should produce something new. Music is very fast. Fashion is really fast, but furniture design is also really fast. You have once a year you have the show in Milan, and you go down there, meet all your colleagues, and drink a lot, and show new pieces. And it's after a couple of years you get quite boring, and also the way that you're pushed to always make something new just for the market, to do something commercial, new shapes, new colors, always something new and fresh. And for me, this was a little bit too fast, and I couldn't really. It became more of a commercial sort of spin-off, which I didn't really like. It's not possible to act slow in this business. And also my furnitures, I mean, they might look quite nice, but they're all really uncomfortable, so I didn't get any royalty, so I didn't make any money. So I had to move on. So I thought, okay, let's do some houses then, because I'm a trained architect. So I've done quite a lot of projects that never realized. This is a house that I quite like. It's for the Swedish artist Andreas Eriksson. He's a painter living on the countryside of Kinnekulle. It's a very traditional historical farm landscape on a ridge overlooking a big lake. And here is the context was really important for this house. In this period, in the beginning of my sort of architectural career, I was very formalistic. I didn't care about really material. I brought my knowledge from graphic design and worked very much with flat surfaces. So in this case, all the facades are like a sheet of paper. But still, there is reminiscence from the culture context with these old stone churches, the barns, all these corrugated green storage for seed and so on. So it's sort of like a blend of that, not so much about the client's program. Therefore, we never built it, I guess. This was the first house we built, and this was a collaboration with a friend of mine called Oskar Kaufmann in Vorarlberg in Austria. The year before, when I still were going to these furniture fairs in Milan, I did a project for wallpaper, and I was supposed to be the interior designer, and he was supposed to be the architect. So we were put together, and we became friends. And the next year, it was an infill house that year. And this year, we thought we'd do small houses, like huts. And this was very interesting because in Austria, as well as in some parts of Swiss, they have a very developed craftsmanship and carpentry. And in this case, this was Kaufmann Holzbau that produced this, and it's done in 78 millimeters Carto plywood, and everything is CNC cut, so we didn't need to have any frames or anything for windows and doors. We could just do all this detailing directly from the massive core of the building. And since this was my first house, I really thought about the idea of a house, and for me it was the archetype of a house with a pitched roof. So we did a little house with a pitched roof, but we just reduced all the detailing to sort of like get the first idea. When you, as a kid, think about or draw a house, you can draw a house with a pitched roof and that's it. So it's sort of like a lack of detail, and that also makes it a little bit interesting. This was supposed to be like a winter hut or a summer hut, or also that you could use for refugee camps or whatever. And it was done the size so it fits like an EU trolley truck. We only did a couple of prototypes and it was never a success. Then after that I thought, okay, I need to do something local, and I need to do a house. I didn't have any clients at all, so I thought, okay, let's buy a little property. And the only place I could afford to buy a property was in a suburb to Stockholm, south suburb, and really extremely ugly context. Stockholm is a very beautiful city, very preserved. The suburbs around it is a blend of old summer huts combined with prefabricated wood houses, combined with pink brick houses. There's sort of like no context at all. So this annoyed me quite a lot, that I only could afford to do it here. But then I thought, okay, I don't like this community, I don't like this context. So I just, like a little bit like Rem Koolhaas said, fuck the context, and just thought I would do my house that sort of like work with the process that I have gained from my projects before. So I draw a little house, and then I thought I really would like it to look like this. And this is also very formalistic. I was still not here either interested in materials at all. Everything was about defining space and in a graphical way. And also to add this, like in the chair, the naive, the poetic, the little stair, or the little thing that sort of add to the pure function to the building. And the building itself is situated on a triangular site, and the topography, there's a little hill, and the house needs to be placed on the hill forget the building permission. So I just did a little house, and then just with a little twist, created the different spaces within the building. It also makes the building appear different from all the directions, and all facades get like a graphic mark that links the interior space with the exterior. And as you see here, it's just there's like no texture at all, so it's fully abstract. And I wanted it to keep it like that, so it should be as close as to my first sketch as possible. So here the placement of all the windows is fully based on the proportions of the facade and also the outlook of the inner spaces. Since this was such a extreme, I mean, you don't see it on the pictures here, but a really ugly area, it was really important if you have lookouts that you don't that you miss all the houses, so that I could focus on the things that I liked in the surrounding. And this was a very low budget house. It's just concrete and plaster. But here also, like in the shelf system, we work quite a lot, or I work quite a lot with perspective and scale, like the vision of when you're entering the process of entering, and when you're entering, you have a window, so you see through, and it makes the building totally flat. So everything was to try to make it more abstract and keep it free from ornaments or added detailing. Here's just the ground floor, and it's just this simple little twist of the building. It's a building with 6-7 facades. Creates the different living spaces. So we have a little toilet and little kitchen and little living room, and yeah. And on the upper floor, it's just 3 bedrooms, a little library, and that's it. Since I didn't have any money at all, I had to use cheap materials, so it's just this concrete and abstract white surfaces with quite cheap windows. We were able to do a couple of small details like doors, and then it was important to sort of also try to change the proportions of them to twist the space a bit and the experience of the space. This is a little door to the where you wash your clothes. This is another project on the west coast. I moved to Gothenburg from after being in Stockholm after school, working there. And this project is a villa for a small family, a couple with a kid, and it's located on a hill overlooking the Atlantic Sea. This is also a region which is really poor, with a blend of all different types of architecture from the 50s till now, with a lot of prefabricated houses. In this area, since it's so close to the water, it's very common to do like traditional fisherman houses, but with a lot of decoration, sort of like a pastiche of old, more countryside houses in wood. Now it's playing itself. But I wanted to do something else here. This is the first sketch of the house. As in the earlier project, I wanted it to sort of be abstract from a distance, but now I'm getting more and more into materials. The first project I was not able to handle more than working with the volume. Here I thought I will add an additional thing to work with, and that was the material. The house itself is, the shape of the house is fully a result of the inner circulation, the outlooks, but also the way it's situated on this hill, the way you move around the building. Same here, that the different views of the house, you get different experiences. This is the site of just a site. You see the car, you enter where from where the car is, and then you see the arrow, that's the entrance. So it's just following the topography of the site. And here it's the same simplified way of dealing with windows, but we have added metal. This was sort of like a reaction to these the context here with all these wood houses. For me, Gothenburg is a city that really had lost its identity. It has the biggest harbor in Scandinavia, and we have a lot of industries, for instance, Volvo. So the way out from the city to Torslanda, where this is built, is almost like the the scene in, when in Sopranos, the first scene when he's driving out to New Jersey and everything is just wasteland. And this is the same way of approaching this area. For me, this is Gothenburg for me, with all these small industrial corrugated almost shelters and all these wasteland. And I really wanted to do that instead of this very decorated wood architecture. So we did it in metal. So from a distance it's abstract, but the closer you get to the building, the more detail you get, or you get the essence of material. So here was the only thing we had to work with here was the metal and the way that the windows were put in the facade, so we still could get this more childish or naive or abstract approach of the building. And here we just used a quite cheap window also from Shukko, one window they usually use for more skyscrapers, that we could be able to do this quite simple detailing with the window. But the metal was a little bit more difficult because in Scandinavia we have Plannja and Rukki that do corrugated steel for more industrial buildings, but it's very rough. So actually here, since I had got contacts in Austria, we made this CNC folded in Austria instead by a small metal shop. The only problem is that metal for facades is not that good to fold. You should roll it, otherwise you get various tolerances and it's very difficult to mount. So that was a big problem because the metal worker here was not used to work with these kind of small tolerances. Here's just the front facade. You see the kitchen, and then you see the living room, and on the upper floor a little library. Actually, the line, the blech we have in the middle, is a result of a poor craftsmanship from the metal worker, because he couldn't really make them straight. But in the end, I think that was quite okay. It was more difficult with the corners. This is a wood frame of the house, and the company that mounted the wood made a tolerance from the ground to the top of the roof, approximately 3 centimeters difference. And then you can imagine if this folded metal is approximately like 15 millimeters. It was extremely annoying, but you get used to it. Same here, we worked with very slight subtle detailing, like the little aluminium roof. So this small gesture, like saying hello. Same here, this is aluminium roof, since it's so thin. And you can't paint aluminium, as you know, you have to coat it first. But this metal shop didn't know that, so they had to redo it. Here's more. This is a quite low budget house, very small, approximately 165 square meters, 3 bedrooms on the top, and here a living room and the kitchen, and then a center core with a little toilet and laundry. This is also quite something unique for Sweden. If you do a family house like this, you're not on the ground floor. You must have a possibility for a sleeping space and a kitchen on the same level. You're not allowed to have stairs in between, because the government, if you, for instance, end up in a wheelchair or when you get old, or you should be able to move on the ground floor, and they pay for the insurance for that. So you're not allowed to have stairs like this in Sweden on the ground floor. So nothing can have stairs. Even if architecture often look better with stairs and you can create different spaces. So in this case, actually, we had to discuss for the final review or the final controlling of the house to add an elevator for disabled people here, just so we can get a check. But then this is on a little hill, so there's like 40 stairs to get up to the house. But since the local community don't pay for that, they don't give a shit. Actually, we have had quite a lot of villas where we couldn't do them because of these stairs, because we said we won't have stairs here. it's unbelievable. Yeah, but here's a detail of the entrance door from the interior. Here is no material; it's just white. This is, I think, the last project we do with white walls. But this was the client's wish. But same here, just the small slight angles of the walls create a flow between the inner spaces and interesting outlooks. Here we have the stairs, not good for disabled people. And the same here, the way we work with the detailing, that the stair is an icon of a stair. It's the way you draw a stair with one with a pencil. So we have tried to keep everything that iconic. This is another project that really doesn't really have much to do with architecture. I lived in Stockholm, and I was like living in the center, and I was hanging there, and I didn't have a family in Stockholm. Spent a lot of time in bars, and I was really bored of the urban life. And I thought, I have to end this, and I moved back to Gothenburg. I was deluded moving back, I guess, but I thought, okay, I just want to be out of the city, so I found this little property on an island out in the archipelago in Gothenburg, and I thought, okay, I buy that and do a little house where I can stay. And the shape of the building was really set from the beginning. There was a house from the 50s with an extension in the 70s, really poor done. But I was not allowed to build outside that volume. So we couldn't really change that we had a pitched roof for the size of the building, which was quite nice because I didn't have to take any decisions in terms of forms. The house is also located in a little caving, but the site has a topography so that you also on the higher part of the property can overlook the harbor of Gothenburg, and it's very beautiful. You see these amazingly big tankers going there. But there was a reason for building the house on this lower part because it's always raining in Gothenburg, always raining the whole year, and it's extremely windy. So this was sort of like a shelter. And for me, this was also something I needed coming from Stockholm, from these bars. But when I talked to the real estate broker, he said, are you crazy? You have to build a house on the top of the site. Then you will get much more money. But for me, this was not important. I wanted to do something more borrowed. And also, if I would have built it on the high top, my neighbor wouldn't have a view. So, and this is the house, and it's very simple. It's just plywood. It's 16 millimeters pine plywood on the outside and 13 millimeters on the inside. Everything is built on site because there's no roads to the house. It's just a simple, cheap tar roof. And the facade is painted in black colored tar, and so it smells very nice. And this was quite funny because there is a company called Saison who makes paint for metal constructions so they don't rust. And then there is a Swedish company called Falu Rödfärg who makes this paint from copper, the copper mines. And all the houses are red in Sweden with this paint from the copper mines. And this other company thought they wanted to compete with this, and they had tar somehow in their collection. So they started to put pigments in the tar, and I thought I could try that. The only problem with tar is that it never dries, so it's not really a consumer product. And since plywood is not sucking up water, it really never dry. So it was quite difficult to paint with. But it's very good for it retain water and rain a lot, but it is a problem with the sun because it's evaporating when it gets warm. Here we didn't have much to play with in terms of proportions and so on, but there's just windows where we need windows. It's just simple detailing like a extruded aluminium drain, a water drain. or gutter. And the inner space is sort of like a product of actually the old foundation of the house. It's just a living space, atelier, and 2 bedrooms and a toilet, and some windows overlooking the where you see the tankers going into the harbor. This is just from the atelier. It's just it's just wood, and it's Here I was starting to get more interesting in materials like the wood, because it was really living here is very. I mean, you work a lot with wood in Switzerland and also in Austria, but the smell of the wood, there is some humble, poetical feeling with touching the material. And just a little kitchen. And everything like the construction is just Carto, because Carto was the ply was the cheapest we could get. After I've been doing a couple of villas, I was asked to do bigger residential projects. There was a competition with a couple of young offices for a site on the south part of Stockholm. And I thought this could be an interesting experience. And we won one of the houses, and it's now built. The idea here is that this area, the whole area along this water strip, is done in the 80s and 90s, and it looks similar all over Sweden and in many places in Europe also. It's sort of like a new modernistic copy and paste architecture. And this developer, he thought he could make some money in trying to sell something else here. And that was sort of like taking the advantage of finding the history of the site. This used to be an industrial area with very old factory houses. So he wanted to sort of like continue that history of that instead. So we made him a little factory. And this was a new typology for us to work with, the scale, but also the way of dealing with handling the detailing and the concept of the house. This project was a lot about not doing a pastiche of an old building, but finding sort of like the true essence of the components in architecture. In this case, about that everything should have a reason for existing. For instance, the client wanted a lot of windows towards this main street. They needed to be possible to open the windows. Therefore, we had to divide them. We needed to have this Brüstung, is it called that in German? Yeah. And it's metal, and we needed to have this Blech, and everything through all the functions, architectural functions, we got a look of an approach of the house that we really didn't. It's just a pragmatic way of dealing with the program and the size of the building. Also, something that came up here was the repetition, because we have only worked with more formalistic small shapes. But here we had to deal with something that the apartments look the same on top of each other and inside of each other, and we need to have a grid. So from here on, everything we work with is grid from the experience from this house. So it's a very clean grid around the building. Yeah. And then, this is the floor plans. I mean, for a residential building like this, you need to have a certain amount of rooms, and you need to have sleeping rooms and kitchen and so on. But still, we want, I mean, in all projects, sort of like that the inner plan reflects the outer shelf of the house. So it's in symbiose. It's the same thing. So we wanted to make more open apartments that could be more. I mean, when you see the house, that you sort of can reflect, you can understand the inside of the house. We work with quite open spaces, but we had to divide it into different rooms. We just work with more like shelf system, dividing these apartments, creating spaces and different rooms. This is an interior visualization of the building. This is when things turns ugly for me in life. Because dealing with this kind of bigger projects, there is a developer. And since in Sweden, the regulation for renting apartments, they have changed it. So nowadays, you only buy your apartments. And this was apartments for buying. And then you don't have you don't have to take care of your building. You build it and you make an exit. And you have like a insurance covering 5 years of maintenance. And then you're free. And this makes, I mean, then you can make a lot of money because the prices in Stockholm they're extremely high. So, I mean, if you can build cheaper and make more money, you will do that. So everything they build now in Sweden, they build in extremely low quality because they don't need to maintain the building because they sell it. And so our intention here was to do, I mean, since we work with this grid, I mean, in all buildings with grids, the subtle detailing is very important. We don't do any big gestures. We don't do colors or shapes. Everything's very functional. But then it comes down to that the window is right and that the metal blech is the right one. And in this case, for instance, we described that we wanted to have Preconal, which is a Danish window company, with frames that are 43 millimeters. And the developer changed the windows to Vicona, buying it from Estland. And these frames are totally flat and are 68 millimeters. And as an architect in Sweden, we have sort of like lost the power. We are not we are not a part of the budget of a project, so we are just like one consultant among other consultants. So with making these changes, for sure the whole house is totally ruined. And when they told me this, that we want to change all the windows, I said I won't do that. And they said, yeah, but we don't care, we will just do it. And then I said, okay, I make a new house. I draw a new house. And I made a new house with new windows, more modernistic. And I was like really satisfied. Actually, it was better. But then they said, like they've said in other projects also, which is totally crazy, we have already made the renderings for the sales brochure. So, sorry, but... and I mean, this happens more. I mean, now we have done a couple of projects like this, and yeah, we can't do it. We can't work as architects doing this. This is during construction. I mean, from a distance, the house is quite nice, but I'm not so satisfied with the detailing. Here's an image from the gable of the house. And here you see that the windows are quite flat. I mean, it's just powder coat aluminium. But what we were planned here was to have a little shadow detail on the window, so we get a nicer view. And also the sun shading, an addition of layer with sun shading is not here. But still, I was glad. I mean, I could have some employees, and it was really fun. And then I got another offer for another project, and I thought, yeah, we do that. After this project, I closed the office because then I couldn't stand it, and I lost my hair, I mean, why should I do this? I mean, then I can do something else. Make my own wine, or I mean, it's not worth it. But we did this also. It's almost finished. This is in a really nice area, actually, in Gothenburg. This is maybe the nicest area just outside Gothenburg. We have very beautiful architecture from the 30s, villas. We have row houses and houses from the 50s. And on this site, they wanted to have houses in park. So we did some houses in park. And here we just continue developing the grid And so this is extremely gridded. We don't have anything that erupts that are outside the grid. I mean, the only thing we have outside the grid is a sculpture. And in this case, we worked in not apartments going through the building. We worked instead along the facade. Since it's a house in park, we wanted all the facades to have the same value. And we work with very traditional classical balconies. This is also some interesting facts about the project like this. The shape of the building, there's two buildings like this. You see it's like change in direction here. And this was not done by us. I mean, we handled it quite good, but this was done in the plan process. The plan process in Sweden is done like 5 years before they build, because the process is so extremely slow. It's so bureaucratic. It's really like the process by Kafka. And then these processes are done by not like the star architects really. It's the interns at the plan office. And this intern, he wanted to have the house like this. The problem with this is that this is north. So I mean, this apartment here is always dark. Instead of, what is it called? Mirroring it. So you get sun here. So this apartment is always dark, and this is something we couldn't do anything about. They noticed that, but they said, but we can't redo it. It's 2 years, and it's too expensive. But what we try to do in these kind of projects, because here's also a lot about money, and it's the question of the percentage between the selling square meters and the built square meters, like in all projects. To add architecture values when they want the apartments to be very tight is difficult. So then we were always trying to figure out a way to create more interesting spaces. I mean, this is a typical plan, but we have 2 staircases here. There is more buildings done by other architects, and they do 3 staircases. But the space we save in doing 2 staircases, we can use in the lobbies or the entrance floors and create a nice social space for the owner, the people living here. So we always try to sort of like finding ways to do it as economy-wise good project as possible, so that they can gain as much money as possible and buy their summer houses in Spain. And we can also do good architecture. And I think in this case we managed to do that in a nice way. Here was the idea from the city that these houses were in brick, because the context is a lot of old brick houses. And we just, in the same manner actually as the first more formalistic buildings, combined with the projects I showed before with the grid. We have the grid, but we also have this more monochrome or monolith building. We have done all the balconies in molded also with brick on all the sides. So everything is very massive and quite heavy. We have also had problems with the windows here, because in Sweden often in this kind of projects you have one contractor, a total contractor doing everything. And when they sign the contract, there's a lot of small rows with really small, tiny letters that says, if you find something similar, it could be an option. And then if they find, for instance, in this case, we specified a Danish brick, a really nice one. And then the contractor, I mean, the stars at the contractors are the calculators, young kids like doing all these calculations. If they find something, I think they get like a pushback or something. And in this case, he found a cheap brick from Lithuania or something. And this brick was actually very cheap. And they said, okay, this has the same, I mean, it works as a brick. It's similar in size. And it's similar. And we want to use this. And then the developer said, no, but we want to have the brick that the architect used. But it says in the contract, if you find something similar, we can use that. So if you want to have the brick that the architect wants, we want, in this case, I think it was 1.5 million euro. to use the original brick. And then the developer says, okay. It's like, and now we will have our brick, but these 1.5 million euro we could have put in having nice windows instead, you know, or so it's always, everything is a struggle and trying to find a solution for somebody who wants to destroy your project. So this was, this is past. And now I just want to have a couple of slides showing you why it looks like it does, and my roots, what I'm into at the moment, that led to this. This is Villa Snellman by Gunnar Asplund, and this is a very early project by him from 1917, and I mean this is a couple of 20th century architectural images. And what's really interesting with Asplund is that he's sort of like standing one foot in classicism and the other foot in modernism. And he's quite lost. He doesn't really know what to do. I mean, he stands for something. He's trying to reduce the ornaments, the gestures, trying to get everything more cleaned. But he can't really let go of this more poetical gestures, like you see here. And the blend of this is something extremely beautiful. And it's difficult to say what it is, but I think it's this struggle that he probably had during this design process. It's a quite radical simplification of the earlier styles, and he was one of the pioneers doing this. And this was just before functionalism and when they got inspired by Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe and so on. This is the Chapel of Resurrection in the Woodland Cemetery in Stockholm. If you're in Stockholm, I mean, if you've been in Stockholm, you've probably been here. But this is a cemetery that it was a competition win by Sigurd Leverens and Gunnar Asplund, and they did a couple of different pieces there. And this was from the beginning, early 1915 to 1940 or something. So you can sort of see their process during this different stages. But here's also, I mean, the clash between this entrance with the columns and this extremely simplified box behind it. And the entrance is even, it's just twisted a bit to make this, I mean, moving here. The contrast between this is very strong. Very interesting building. Another project that is that we have been inspired a lot with is the Eastern Cemetery in Malmö. This was also a competition win by Sigurd Leverens. And the interesting thing here is that it's like from the beginning of the 20th century until his death, he worked with the projects here. So you can really see his development. And he was really early in his development of new styles. This is St. Birgitta's Chapel, and this is a really this is really a classicistic piece, but it also has something a depth to it. It's really heavy. It's like just like a bunker, and this sort of like black, heavy. Something on your shoulder is getting more and more into me, and I'm getting more and more darker in the projects I do now. I don't know if I'm sadder. I live a quite happy life, but it's sort of like just getting darker and darker. And here's another project in Gothenburg. This is the extension of the law court. And we have a house to the left from the 7th century and an extension by Gunnar Asplund. This was a competition he won 1915, but it was not built until 1935. There were some development changes. But you can also see Gunnar Asplund, who is now totally influenced by modernism with the grid, but he's still working with ornaments, and also the way he connects with the building and this old house that he actually rebuilt to get the right proportions of this building when he did the extension. I mean, this is a masterpiece, and when I travel abroad, a lot of people know about these architects for sure, but in Sweden, nobody gives a shit about these ones. For instance, here in Gothenburg, we have a city architect, and this building now, this used to be a law court, has now changed to something else. It's still owned by the company government's own, or by the local community. But they have done a redecoration. They have used a small architecture firm doing interior design, and their main furniture they use in other projects are from IKEA. And they have put in like glass walls, changed some doors, and I mean, for me it's... and this company, Higab, that is called, owns a lot of historical buildings around the city, and they don't give a shit about the buildings. It's quite terrifying. I mean, nobody would sort of like put an interior designer to put wallpapers on Ingmar Bergman's house on Fårö. The whole film industry would have done a revolt. But when it comes to architecture, we don't care about our history. This is from an image from 1930. This was like the peak of the functionalism, and this was very much inspired by Bauhaus, of course. But this was an exhibition held in Stockholm, and some very prominent architects in Sweden did some very interesting projects here. Everything now is teared down, of course. During the 1930s, the Social Democrats got in power in Sweden, and with the leader Per Albin Hansson, and they wanted to create something political that they called folkhemmet. Folkhemmet was something that should provide good housing for everybody, common people. And the idea was very fine, very beautiful, but as we can see now, it just ended up in low quality and segregation. But the folkhemmet this was something going on until the 60s, from the 30s to the 60s. This is a good example of a house from this period. This is from 1946 by Ralph Erskine, row houses. You can see that the detailing is getting less and less the closer to now we get, but still you have some beautiful small detailing. You have a personal pitch roof with a flat top, and everything is just smooth and really nice during this period. And it's getting more and more prefabricated, but still you can find all this detailing, nice detailing, the wood and the different materials and brick and so on. Here is back again, Eastern Cemetery in Malmö. Ralph Erskine, Sigurd Leverens, as I said, he did a lot of different buildings here, very classicistic in the beginning, and now he ends, just before he dies, he makes the flower kiosk, and it's fully blossomly brutalistic. And then he dies. I think it's very beautiful, and it's a very interesting space to visit. And this is a building that today feels very real. I mean, this could have been, I guess Olje Gatti would have been glad if he did this building. But here, I would say, it ends Swedish architectural history. After this, everything is just pure shit, except a couple of pieces by some architects, like Peter Celsing and now Johan Celsing and so on. But after the Second World War, there was a lack of housing, and we needed to build a lot in Sweden. And the biggest cities needed to increase, the population increased, and the government decided that between 1964 and 75, they needed to build 1 million apartments around the biggest cities. And this is where we created our suburbs. And the suburbs in Sweden, I mean, we do everything very radically. I mean, if we want to do suburbs, we really do suburbs. If we want to tear down city centers, we tear down them. So we really did this good. So we have a lot of really poor suburbs. And during this period then, I mean, before this, the architectural sort of like development was decided by the local communities. Now everything was run by the government sitting in Stockholm. So it was a big scale machine, this. And during this period, this 10 years, for sure, the industry woken up and said, yeah, we can make money here. Let's start with prefab. And they started with the prefab industries. And the architects, I don't know, this was, I mean, after the 60s, I don't know what they did, but they just laid down, lost all their power in the process, didn't pay the insurances, I don't know. But after this, the work we do as an architect in Sweden is approximately 70% of what you do, or in Austria anyway. If I calculate a budget, if I calculate that in Austria, they would say I will have 70% of what an architect do, because we don't have any responsibility for anything. And this is the way that the architects, I mean, they felt good in this, but now it's a really big problem. So there we are. It's not that easy to continue with this, but I will show you some, just fast, a couple of projects that we are doing now. I said after this apartment stuff, I really closed the office and said I don't want to do this anymore. But we won some competitions, and we continue working anyway. And I mean, for me, scale is not of importance. It doesn't matter if it's a big project or a small project. I mean, if it's a furniture or if it's a big residential project. But this is a small project in Lausanne. They have this garden fair every 4th year or whatever, and we did a little pavilion. They had a little competition. This is Platz de Tunnel in Lausanne. It's not there anymore. And this was also just like a small, more object thing. It was a little hill. We just took a hill from the countryside, put it on pillars, sort of like abstract. It doesn't even touch the urban space. You can just walk under it. And then we planted herbs from the Alps. And the idea was that during season it will change. You will have snow, and you will have just gray grass, and then you will have green flowering. This was the first draft of that project. The same as all projects start with a little draft. And here's a construction site. This is a project called Black House. I was invited by a Scottish curator to do a project together with some Swiss architects. We were supposed to build a house in Isle of Harris in Scotland. And this is a region where it's not a very dense population, and they don't build much. They just sort of wanted to say this is a typical black house, traditional house. It's burned down to, I mean, it's a very harsh environment with a lot of rain and wind, and they mainly have stone here, so they're digged down. And how would a black house look today with the way we live today? So he invited a couple of architects, among them Pascal Flammer, Raphael Schubert, Angela Deuber, and a couple of other young, very talented Swiss architects. And we did one house each. This is a draft of the house. I mean, here is where I think I start to think in another way a bit. Now I don't have a client really, and it's all about taking the backpack from earlier projects and trying to develop my own personal approach to architecture. It's an eclectic way of thinking, not very thought out. It's just I work a lot with archetypes. We have the column, we have the circle, we have the load-bearing structure, and just playing around with these archetypes. Here's the house. It's called 4 columns. It's the density and the heaviness of the black houses, but reverted somehow. So it's lifted up from the ground. It's even not sitting on the ground. It's even the ground floor is the slab is lifted up. The roof is just holding up by 4 big columns, and we have a traditional chimney in the middle. And this is sort of like I wanted to have this. The power, the heaviness of these black houses, the density of them, but in emphasized by having this heavy roof, just lying on these columns, almost like falling down. So it's unstable construction somehow. So it's a reverted black house. Here's an elevation, and it's just a way of stacking archetypes. And from both my graphical experience, from my furnitures, but also from it's a little blend. Here's a section. It's not much to say, but here's an interior visualization. But just this, it's still very raw. I mean, now it's could be concrete, so it's materialized, but it's still very formalistic. But only actually about structure. And by just putting a column or a chimney, the idea was to create directions in the different rooms and emphasizing things, like in this case the chimneys in the center of the room, and defining the way you put furnitures or you behave in the room. This is the sleeping area. Just also for myself, trying to understand what is a wall. Is it load bearing? Is it hanging? Is it just standing? What's the purpose for the different elements we're working with? Is it to define space? Has it some other purpose? So it was a very long process of just developing these thoughts. We worked half a year and did approximately 500 renderings of this project, just because it was interesting. It just ended up in a small exhibition and a little book. But it has been very important for me in my process. Just 2 projects more. This is a project in the outside Stockholm. It's a very beautiful area. It's an industrial area done by Ferdinand Boberg in the end of 19th century, with brick houses. They wanted a small extension. They're turning this old gas factory that delivered gas to all the lamps in the city. They want to turn this into commercial area and build a lot of poorly done residential houses here. And they wanted a small building to place a small cultural activity. And here's the area. It's extremely beautiful. So the building is just behind this one. I don't know if I mentioned it, but this is a lost competition. And it's my best architectural piece ever done, and I lost it, and it was extremely annoying, especially when the winning project was so bad, very populistic. But it doesn't matter. The house is this one. It's now it's sort of like a mix of everything I've experienced so far. It's formalistic, but it's also very pragmatic, the way the looks. All these houses done by Ferdinand Boberg has gables, like motifs on the gables, very strong, creating these different roads like this. We wanted to do the same. We wanted to have say, here I am, and emphasizing this direction. Still, we wanted to have this will be a restaurant. We will have morning sun, afternoon sun, and we didn't want to create an alley, a backside of the house. So the shape is just a result of the context. And in this case, I really enjoy the context. So I worked with the context. And the best is if you like the context, because then the houses feel much more integrated. This is an axonometry of the houses. You see, we have this gable. This is like an abstract, like a Western facade, emphasizing saying, here I am, with a little roof over the entrance. On the ground floor, we have a bookstore, and on the first, second, and third, we also have an art gallery. And here, in many projects nowadays, we work a lot with ornaments, very much with ornaments, and working in a quite classicistic approach. In the end, everything is gone, but except some small detailing. In this case, it's just a little railing on the balcony. And here's a model of the house. So here's the entrance to the bookstore, the entrance to the art space in 3 levels. And then we also have a big basement floor with a little theater. And what I experienced here is that architecture, for me now, is only about holes in the facade, openings. I mean, approaching an opening, entering, seeing through. In this case here, I only work with all the windows like more scenography, like a theater. So it's like layers. It's like the brick, and from the inside you see the brick, then you see the sun shading, then you see the window, and then you see the inner wall. So everything is like an old toy theater. So it's very much scenography. So every time you move up on a room, you have an outlook, and that is through a window like a television show. And it's all about the openings of the building. The rest is just a result of the context. Here's a little visualization of the facade, the bookstore, and the railing. And here, very inspired by Sigurd Leveren's project, his church in Klippan, where he works this cladded brick or smeared brick that gets this abstract monolith, but still it's materialized. And I really like that combination. We have the same detail as you saw from the more commercial earlier residential projects. And the only detailing we have here is this little metal things holding up the brick. Here's the basement. And also just by doing small things like changing the direction of a pillar, you can create flows in the spaces. Here's more a theater space, and here's a stair up to the house next to it, which is a restaurant, and here's just a rooftop window. But just these angles, like the early black corrugated metal villa, but maybe more worked out this time. This is the entrance floor with the bookstore, the entrance to the gallery space. This is the last project what we are at now. This is an international competition we won. I think actually it was just before here I quitted the office, but when we got the result here, we opened again. And this is an extension of the business law and business school in Gothenburg. And yeah, we have our office here. So it's and the other offices were from abroad or from Stockholm, so I think we had a real advantage of knowing the context. And this context is for me also something I can work with. This is Carl Nyrén, quite in Sweden famous architect. This was his first competition win. You can see it's from the 50s, and he was really inspired by the courthouse by Gunnar Asplund. I mean, he really admired Asplund, and you can see it in his grid. Looks the same. So he did this house, this quite beautiful extension from the inside anyway, and then this crap building here is from the early 90s. But it's typical for the 90s, and it's okay for being that, but it's not so refined. But they didn't want to tear down that. They wanted to tear down this, which is really sad, but I mean, hey, I won, so what can I do? But respect for Carl Nyrén. I really want to work with his house and work with the context of the urban space. I mean, this is a block within the city that is really not a street way of handling a block in the center. This is more like a solitaire in the city. And we really wanted to make a corner here, which was a part of this old stone part of the city. And one thing that also adds to the project is that this will be an exit for a new train station. They will build a train tunnel under the city. So when you come from Norway, you can go directly down to Copenhagen instead of reversing the train. So they spend like half the budget of Sweden to do this tunnel, and they will have a little exit here. So that was a part of the project. And here's an axonometry of the building. You see Carl Nyrén's house here, and you see our extension then. It's a low part. We have auditoriums dig down under the ground. with roof lights from the inner courtyard, and then we have a lower part with lecture halls and more public spaces, and a higher part with offices and more workshop spaces. And here it was very obvious that we wanted to create a corner in the city, but also work with culinary. And so what we have done is a grid, as we have started to work with earlier projects, and we also work with change in scale, like the Meccano shelf. So this is really an upscaled grid. So it almost makes the building feel like a toy or something abstract in the context. These are very big windows, and we have the same stone facade, similar to what Norén used, but we do it a little bit more rougher, and we do everything a little bit more heavy, a little bit more dense. And I think the reason for that is it's a law school. It should have some prominence to it, but also they wanted an open building, and I don't do glass buildings, but I do it in my way. And then this is more like it's a little bit naive. The scale is out of proportion, and it feels like you can quite easily connect to it somehow. It doesn't scare you, even if I want people to feel really that they should spit blood when they move in. But I have not told the developer that. Here's a facade from the other side. We just have two small roofs emphasizing the train station, the school, and then you see here also we have the little railing, the same railing. From the beginning here we also had a lot of classicistic or more Greek ornaments, but in the end it's just a railing that is left. But it's very important for the approach of the building. Here's just a plan. It's very simple. Just grid 7.6 meters, inner core. That's it. And here's a section where you see the train station and some inner courtyards, the lower auditoriums underground with light from the courtyard. Actually, here down is the tunnel. And this is the last image. This is a view over the rooftop terrace. And here, I forgot to mention that. I will just say that the earlier projects I showed with the sculpture, the client said, because they will have, in Sweden, they have like 1% of the building budget for art. And I said, yeah, I want to have a bronze sculpture here. And they said, we don't know. I mean, can't we do something with a photo on a concrete slab or something? I said, no, I mean, why? And okay, you will have to have a meeting with our in-house architect. And the in-house architect came to the office and he said, what about that sculpture? I think, doesn't it look a bit social nationalistic? He said, is that the right name? Yeah. And I didn't know if I should laugh or cry. But yeah, I said, yeah, take away the sculpture. But I will have it here. But that's the sort of like the way that they imagine our work at the moment. They think it's not human enough. But for me, it's very important that things you should sort of like be smashed into something or get something. You need to get something. You should feel it in the stomach. Architecture should be. It must be more. You should like hurt a bit, but in a nice way. Or so we will try to do something even more harder now, I think. Thank you very much for listening.